Step out of the car, now!
The shout of a power-drunk officer shattered the silence of a Toledo night. To him, the badge meant absolute authority. To her, it was just another challenge. She looked like an ordinary driver, but behind the wheel sat Lieutenant Colonel Adrienne Wallace, a woman who had led convoys through war zones, safeguarded soldiers on 4 continents, and lived her entire life by discipline. Sergeant Daniel Mercer saw only a civilian he expected to control. What he didn't know was that this traffic stop, something routine, almost trivial, would ignite a chain of events leading both of them into a courtroom where power and honor would be flipped upside down. And the ending would stun everyone. The story begins on a late Wednesday night after 11 o'clock on the empty streets of Toledo, Ohio. At that hour, only a few night shift workers were heading home, and a sleek black SUV, nothing flashy, nothing showy, but solid and tidy just like its owner. The driver was Lieutenant Colonel Adrienne Wallace, who had just finished a military meeting at a base 2 hours' drive away. She was leisurely heading home, softly humming a tune, in rhythm with the steady roll of the tires on the road. Adrienne wasn't speeding, didn't drift lanes, nothing unusual. But for Sergeant Daniel Mercer, who was lurking off Reynolds Road with a cup of cold coffee, it looked different. The night was so quiet he was scrolling his phone to kill time. Then suddenly the unfamiliar SUV appeared. Mercer hurriedly tossed the cup onto the passenger seat, flipped on the police lights, and pulled out. Adrienne noticed the flashing red lights behind her. Calmly, she slowed down, signaled, and pulled over. Every movement was by the book, decisive like reflexes drilled for many years. The patrol car door slammed. In the rearview mirror, Adrienne saw a tall man approaching, hand already on his holster flashlight shining straight ahead. "License and registration," Mercer barked. Not a single greeting. Adrienne kept both hands on the wheel and lowered the window halfway. "Officer, may I ask why I was stopped?" Mercer narrowed his eyes, the beam stabbing straight into her face. "You drifted out of your lane, didn't signal." "Looks like you're drunk." Adrienne raised an eyebrow slightly. "I am not." "License and registration this time." His voice was louder. Adrienne didn't argue. She slowly opened the glove compartment and took out the documents. As she handed them to Mercer, she added, "This is an official vehicle. I'm a federal employee." Mercer glanced at the ID, paused a beat, then smirked. "Military? That doesn't mean you're above the law." "I never said that," Adrienne replied calmly. Mercer's face suddenly hardened. He ordered, "Step out of the car. I'm giving you a breath test." Adrienne tightened her jaw slightly. "Excuse me, I have fully cooperated. I haven't had anything to drink." "Can you give me a clearer reason?" Mercer took another step, his voice grinding. "You are refusing a lawful order." Adrienne didn't move. "I just want you to clarify." Silence stretched for a second, then Mercer opened the car door himself. "I'm ordering you to step out now." Adrienne still didn't raise her voice. She simply opened her phone and turned on the camera. "Just to be clear from now on, this interaction will be recorded." Mercer's eyes wavered briefly at the bright lens, but his ego overwhelmed it. He barked again. Out Adrienne stepped out. Her posture was upright, not resistant, but there was an aura about her that made it hard to dismiss her. Even in civilian clothes, every movement said this woman is used to iron discipline. Mercer made her do the test, walk a straight line under the streetlight like a drunk driver on a Saturday night. Adrienne executed every step without a miss. No shaking, no stumbling. But Mercer still wrote a citation for failure to maintain lane. Adrienne accepted the ticket without arguing. She gave him a brief look, then returned to her car and drove off into the night. Mercer had no idea that little piece of paper would bring him into a courtroom, unleashing a storm he had never imagined in 15 years on the job. Years in the force had carved deep lines into Daniel Mercer's face, and carved even deeper into his character an absolute belief in the power of the badge. Mercer had been through everything from tense confrontations in neighborhoods to chaotic highway accidents. At the West Side Toledo precinct, his name made rookies both respect and fear him. He didn't ask questions. He gave orders. To Mercer, being a cop meant control the final say whether it was a hard-headed teenager or a frustrated driver. He had never backed down and never apologized. Colleagues knew well they had an officer who was on time, did the paperwork, and never hesitated to act. But they also knew he was quick-tempered, ready to escalate. Still, no one really challenged him until the night Adrienne Wallace appeared. After stopping her, Mercer returned to the station as if nothing noteworthy had happened. He entered the data into the system failure to maintain lane possible suspicious signs. No arrest. Then tossed the body cam into the charging dock as usual. The video sat there for 2 days before anyone bothered to review it. In the meantime, Mercer joked about it in the break room. "That woman tried to pull rank on me," Mercer said to Officer Diaz with a coarse laugh. Flashed her government ID like that was supposed to impress me. Diaz frowned. Wait, she was military. She said so. Some federal lady with an attitude. "Name's Wallace. Adrienne Wallace," Mercer said while tearing open a snack. At that name, Diaz's face suddenly changed. "You mean Lieutenant Colonel Wallace? She lectured at the academy last year. She's not just a regular service member. She handles logistics at Fort Wayne, wears a Silver Star 2 deployments to the Middle East. She's the real deal." Mercer hesitated for a moment, then waved it off. "I don't care. On the road, I'm the law." Even so, Diaz's respectful tone left a crack in Mercer's outer shell of confidence. Still, he didn't review the video. To him, the matter was over. But in reality, it wasn't. The very next morning, Adrienne Wallace filed a complaint, not only with Internal Affairs, but she also sent it straight to the Office of Inspector General. The video she recorded was handed to the legal team, and a copy quietly circulated through the military chain of command. Mercer knew nothing about any of it. He kept patrolling, kept barking at people, still believing he was untouchable, because for years the system had protected him. Superiors looked the other way. The union shielded him. Complaints vanished into thin air. Mercer believed the rules didn't apply to him like they did to others. But this time on the other side stood someone who wasn't afraid. Adrienne didn't scream, didn't resist, and didn't let it go. She followed procedure-preserved evidence and called the right office at the right time. And most importantly, she had proof. Mercer only began to feel the ground tilt when an envelope stamped formal inquiry was placed on his desk. Adrienne Wallace wasn't someone who liked to create drama. After 22 years in the military and 2 tours in combat zones, she had faced enough to know when to keep quiet, but this time was different, not just because of herself. She thought of the young soldiers she had mentored. She thought of the civilians who had been treated unfairly but had no voice. Especially the women, particularly women of color, who had swallowed their anger too many times to avoid trouble. And this time, she didn't intend to do that. At her office in Fort Wayne the next morning, Adrienne sat in front of the screen. She had barely slept the night before, not only because of anger, but because the traffic stop kept replaying in her mind. The way Mercer spoke as if she were worthless. The hand that hovered near his holster. The little provocations designed to force her into reacting. Adrienne knew exactly how badly it could have ended if she had lost her temper, even with the camera rolling. Her aide, Sergeant Daniels, poked his head in. "Are you all right, ma'am?" Adrienne looked up, her voice calm but firm. "No. But I'm handling it." Daniels stepped in and closed the door. I watched the footage. "Want me to alert the base legal office already did?" Adrienne answered decisively. He hesitated. "Are you sure you want to bring this into the light?" Adrienne leaned back, eyes steady. "I'm not seeking attention. I'm seeking accountability." And she meant it. Throughout her career, Adrienne had lived with discipline and integrity. The rank on her shoulder wasn't just a position, it was a symbol of how she chose to live. The silver star on Adrienne Wallace's shoulder wasn't some showy ornament. It was the result of decades of sweat and decisions tied to human lives. She had led military convoys through war zones filled with mines and machine guns. She had organized relief after major storms when entire communities could only rely on the military's hands. She bore responsibility for soldiers, for logistics, for security on 4 continents. Yet, on that dark road in Ohio, all of that vanished in Mercer's eyes. To him, Adrienne was just a suspicious driver, a woman who didn't respond according to his script. What gnawed at Adrienne wasn't just how he behaved, but how smoothly confident he was while doing it as if it were an everyday thing. Adrienne didn't stay silent. She called the JAG office, then sent the evidence straight to the federal inspector. The video was included along with a brief report, no embellishment, no dramatization, just the facts. Within a week, the story began spreading in military legal circles. It hadn't hit the press yet, but Mercer's name was already in an internal investigation file. If this story moves you, please like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps ensure the right voices are heard and understood. Adrienne continued her daily work, no grandstanding, not mentioning it unless someone asked. But behind the scenes, she and her attorney were preparing another course of action alleging that Mercer may have violated federal policy when he stopped a government employee without reasonable cause. And if necessary, they would take it to court. Adrienne wasn't intimidated, in fact she welcomed it. Mercer, on the other hand, didn't think this would go anywhere. Until the day he received a thin brownish-yellow envelope right in the police department parking lot. He tore it open half-absently, assuming it was just a routine summons. But inside was a notice to appear in court. Plaintiff Lieutenant Colonel Adrienne Wallace. Allegations constitutional rights violations during a traffic stop, including unlawful detention threats and abuse of power. Mercer stood still for a minute, then let out a dry laugh. Nonsense. This will never stick. But when he returned to the station, the atmosphere had changed. Captain Reading called him into the office, shut the door, and drew the blinds. "We need to talk," he said sternly. "Arms crossed," Mercer said about her. "She's just trying to play the victim." Reading didn't smile. "She's not playing anything. Do you know who she is? I don't care. She copped an attitude, and now she's mad I didn't cater to her." Reading leaned forward. "She's a lieutenant colonel, a combat veteran, a spotless record, and a deep network. And she has video 2 angles, hers and yours." Mercer waved a hand. "So, what are we bowing to, a couple bars on his shoulder? No, Reading said, but we can't act like nothing happened. You will go to court, and when this gets out, and it will, it's going to blow up." Mercer tried to hold on to his arrogance. "She wasn't arrested. I never laid a hand on her. I followed procedure." Reading looked straight at him. "You lost your temper. You turned a compliant citizen into a suspect before you even knew who she was." For the first time, Mercer had no sharp retort. The summons set a trial date 3 weeks out. In that time, the whole department buzzed. Whispers in the locker room, scrutinizing looks in the hallway. No one confronted him directly, but Mercer knew the wolves had smelled blood. Meanwhile, at the base, Adrienne prepared in her own way. No press conference, no rallying cry. She and the legal team quietly reviewed every frame, noted every word and gesture. Her attorney, Delaney Price, looked at her and asked, "Are you sure you want to take this to trial publicly? It will follow you." Adrienne nodded good. Price paused. Most people would let it go. Adrienne replied, "I've let too much go already. This isn't just about me." She wasn't seeking a payout. She wanted a public record, a marker people could point to later, that power does not permit degrading human dignity, and silence is not the only option. And when the day in court arrived, Adrienne didn't enter the courtroom as a victim. She walked in wearing a crisp uniform, medals on her chest, a silver star shining under the lights. She wanted the jury to see clearly that night she wasn't just a woman behind the wheel. She was a human being. Someone who had devoted her life to protecting the very principles Mercer had trampled. Adrienne Wallace was not just an ordinary citizen. She was someone who had given her life to the country, who respected the law and expected the same in return. When she entered the courtroom, Mercer was already seated at the defense table. He looked up and caught a glimpse of the immaculate uniform, the ribbons gleaming under the lights. The habitual sneer on his lips softened for the first time. But the real test was only beginning. When Adrienne took the witness stand, the courtroom fell silent. The benches were full, not with reporters, not yet, but with officers from the local police department mixed with military colleagues from Fort Wayne. They sat shoulder to shoulder with curious civilians, many of whom likely thought this was just a traffic stop, blown out of proportion. But for Adrian, this was the eruption point of a truth that had long been smoldering. Mercer sat rigid in a gray suit, face tense, expressionless. Defense attorney Charles Brenner whispered in his ear, but Mercer didn't react. His eyes were fixed on the judge's bench, trying to maintain calm. Adrian stood straight, adjusted her collar, and stepped to the stand with the poise that had helped her lead convoys through combat zones. No rush, no hesitation. Her posture and gaze made the entire room sit up straighter. The judge nodded slightly. "Lieutenant Colonel Wallace, thank you for your service. You may begin." Attorney Delaney Price approached voice-clear. "Lieutenant Colonel, please describe the night of January 17th. Adrian spoke clearly, without dramatics, just the facts. "I was driving back from a meeting with the Indiana Guard Reserve around 11:15. I was stopped by Officer Mercer. I wasn't driving recklessly and showed no signs of intoxication. I cooperated, asked reasonable questions, and he responded with hostility. Her voice remained even. He ordered me out without explanation. When I asked for a reason, he just repeated the order louder. At that point, I turned on my phone to record." Price continued. "Did you refuse any lawful order?" "No." "Did you resist?" "No." "Did you identify yourself?" "Yes. I made it clear I am a federal employee driving a government vehicle." The room went silent. Only the scratch of pens taking notes could be heard. Then the evidence was played. First Adrian's phone video, clear images, Mercer's abrasive tone. Then the body cam, every gesture, every look, his hand hovering near the holster. The unnecessary straight-line test, the sneer even after she passed perfectly. No one on the jury said a word, but you could feel the atmosphere change. Brenner rose to cross-examine slow and measured with a hint of feigned respect in his tone. "Lieutenant Colonel Wallace, is it possible Officer Mercer was simply following procedure?" Adrian didn't blink no. "Is it possible he was concerned for your safety or for others?" I stayed in my lane. I was completely sober. I was not aggressive. There was no safety concern here. Then why record? Adrian looked straight at him. "Because I've lived long enough to know silence protects no one. I needed an accurate record of what happened." Brenner shifted his angle. "Do you not believe police should have discretion during a traffic stop?" Adrian answered calm, yet resolute. "Discretion must be paired with discipline. A badge is not a license. It is a responsibility." The words rang out, and even the judge paused before moving on. Then it was Mercer's turn to be confronted. He didn't testify, he only stood there watching as the footage played frame by frame. The prosecutor's voice cut through Sergeant Mercer. "Why did you order her out of the car?" She looked flustered. "Did she disobey any command?" "She challenged me." "Is asking a question a crime?" Mercer hesitated. "No." "Did she raise her voice or threaten you?" "No." "Then what made you escalate the situation?" Mercer stayed silent. "Sergeant, did you know she was a United States Army lieutenant colonel?" "No, I didn't at the time. And if you had known," Mercer's voice dropped smaller, "maybe I would have handled it differently." The courtroom went still again. It wasn't remorse, just a bare admission Mercer would have treated her differently, not because of right or wrong, but because of rank and power. Mercer's slip said it all that night. He didn't see a human being. He saw someone who wouldn't bow, wouldn't answer the way he wanted, wouldn't submit completely. And now, with Adrian sitting across from him, her rank shining on her chest, the whole courtroom saw it too. But the trial wasn't over. There was still a larger question. What does real accountability look like? 3 days later, the verdict came down. The courtroom was much quieter by then. No ranks filling the back rows, no police officers observing. Only Adrian, her attorney, and a few curious locals. Mercer sat beside his lawyer, hands clenched, trying to keep the same stone face he'd worn throughout, but the tight jaw betrayed his tension. Judge Cynthia Morales shuffled the case file and looked up. In Wallace v. Mercer, the jury is found in favor of the plaintiff. Mercer shifted slightly. Adrienne remained still, simply listening. The court finds a constitutional violation in the traffic stop and unlawful detention. Sergeant Mercer's conduct was inconsistent with departmental policy and failed to meet basic standards of professional conduct. No applause, no murmurs, only the weight of consequences settling in. Mercer's attorney leaned over and whispered, "We will appeal." But even his voice lacked certainty. The judge continued. While there will be no criminal charges at this time, the plaintiff is awarded $35,000. This decision will be entered into the public record permanently and forwarded to the Department of Justice and the Toledo Police Department for review of policy and internal procedures. Adrienne didn't smile and didn't raise a fist in victory. She simply nodded once, not to the judge, not to the jury, but to herself. She had done what needed to be done. Outside the courthouse, Mercer hurried down the steps, avoiding the lenses of local reporters. No more smug grin, only a man shielding his face with a folder, quietly getting into a car and disappearing. In the hallway, Adrienne stopped and opened her phone. "The verdict is in your favor. Case closed." Attorney Delaney Price stepped up. "You could have asked for more." Adrienne shook her head. It was never about the money. Delaney studied her. "Do you think this will change anything?" Adrienne turned toward the glass doors and answered, "I don't know. But maybe the next time he stops someone, he'll think twice." A week later, Mercer was suspended pending an internal investigation. Rumors swirled that he would be reassigned. Others said his career was over. Either way, the shield that had protected him for so long had cracked and everyone could see it. Back at Fort Wayne, Adrienne returned to her routine. No press conferences, no interviews. She wasn't seeking a hero label. She had soldiers to train, missions to complete, responsibilities to uphold. But within the unit, the message was unmistakably clear. You don't have to scream to demand respect. You don't have to collapse to prove you've been wronged. Sometimes steadfast silence carries the farthest. Even so, Adrienne knew a verdict is not an ending. Accountability doesn't end at punishment. It also lies in what happens next. 2 months later, Adrienne stood before a class of new recruits at Fort Wayne. Young faces, uniforms only a few weeks old, eyes bright and full of hope. She didn't talk tactics or logistics. That day, the lesson was leadership, the kind that shows when no one is looking. She looked around and asked, "How many of you think wearing this uniform automatically earns respect?" A few hands went up, some hesitant, some confident. Adrienne nodded. "I understand why you think that. But the truth is, respect isn't handed to you. It's something you prove every day with every choice." The room grew quiet. Adrienne continued. "Power is the same. It's not a shield to hide behind or a stick to threaten others. It's a responsibility each of us has to carry. And how we use it defines who we really are, a badge, a rank, or authority. They are not shields. They are burdens. And if you can't carry them with discipline, then you don't deserve to carry them at all." At the back of the room, a young recruit leaned forward, eyes fixed on her. Adrienne paused a beat, then went on. "That day when I was pulled over, I could have shouted. I could have panicked. Or I could have stayed silent and let it go like so many others. But I didn't. I recorded. I filed the complaint. I went to court, and I told the truth." She swept her gaze across the room. "That officer thought his badge made him untouchable until he saw my rank. Not just on my uniform, but in the way I carried myself. That's the difference. That's leadership." Silence filled the room. Not an empty silence, but the kind that follows a lesson that hits home. Adrienne closed her folder and lifted her head. "Lead with character. Serve with integrity. And never forget, when you wear this uniform, you don't just represent yourself. You represent everyone who came before you and everyone who will follow." She stepped down from the podium, not seeking applause, not expecting thanks. For Adrienne, the work was done. She wanted this story to remain as a reminder power without responsibility is only a mask for cowardice. Speak up. Stand firm. When you see something wrong, don't turn away. Silence is a refuge for the guilty. Courage is the protection for everyone else. While Mercer chose to hide behind a badge to impose his will, Adrian chose to face it with discipline and truth. On one side was arrogance that seemed invincible. On the other was the quiet strength of character and responsibility. And in the end, justice tilts only toward the side with truth, because power without discipline is just a fragile mask. The lesson is clear: respect doesn't come from rank. It comes from how we live each day. A badge, a rank, or a title isn't a shield. It's a weight we are obliged to carry with dignity and integrity. Adrian refused to stay silent, and that choice turned a seemingly meaningless traffic stop into a wake-up call for everyone. Remember, fairness isn't measured by the loudest voice, but by evidence, principle, and courage. Sometimes a single small decision can change the entire landscape. So, what about you? Share your thoughts in the comments. If you found this story meaningful, don't forget to hit like, share it with friends, and subscribe so you don't miss the next stories. Your engagement and support help us continue bringing valuable films and lessons to you.